and Shoplifted and 8 Rings. The field is in the stretch. No Parole is all out. Mischievous Alice is there. Here is Tapper to win on the outside. Echo Town is still in with a chance. And on the far outside, it is Shoplifted. There's a 16th to the finish. And here's Echo Town now to take over. And Echo Town is drawing away in the stretch. Echo Town wins the Allen Jerkin Stakes, presented by Run Happy. Tapper to win was...
Welcome back to another Breeders' Cup preview here on Racing Rundown. Today we're going to be talking about the Grade 2 Phoenix, a 6 furlong sprint at Keeneland Racecourse, a really nice card that Keeneland has. This upcoming weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are all great cards. And this is the first of the Grade 6 that we're going to start off with, and this is the first that, in order of chronology, Keeneland has. As always, we have the usual drill. We'll go through every horse and give them his fair analysis. There's 12 horses in the field. It's a sprint race, and the more horses in a sprint race like this, especially in a sprint division that is now pretty wide open, it doesn't really have a clear leader. It makes for some really interesting races going forward. The first horse that we're going to get to is Sha Sha Shake Me Up, a horse last start out the Pat Day Mile I was really high on. A horse that is definitely going to be a big long shot. He's 30-1 right now on the morning line. So, and I think, I'm going to go back to that angle that I had him with the Pat Day Mile. I'm not going to put him as high as I did with the Pat Day Mile, but if you didn't see that preview that I talked about him, he does have some bad efforts in stakes races. The 6th and the 11th in the LeCompte and the Risen Star are not that attractive. I can understand people looking at that and being a little bit turned off by it, but since he's run some nice races since then, got an allowance win at Oaklawn at a big price, almost 50-1. And there were some decent horses in that allowance race. You had horses like American Butterfly, as well as Nucky, who, despite all the circumstances that happened in the Del Mar Futurity, is a Grade 1 winner. But the real big horse that I allude to with this was Ginobili. Ginobili ran a really good second to Nadal earlier this year in the San Vicente. I thought we may have seen a little bit more quality from Ginobili that we haven't seen up to this point, so a little bit disappointed with him, but Ginobili has been highly touted in the past. Regardless of talking about the individual quality of these horses, I think that Sha Sha Shake Me Up is definitely a horse that you want to look at underneath. I'm not going to go with him all the way on top in terms of second, but I think he's a bottom of an exotic wager. I think he's a good third or fourth play in a race like this. The two horses absolutely aid in one of the likely speed presences in this race. There's a few speed horses, most notably No Parole, who we'll get to in a few minutes. But to talk about absolutely Aiden, he's got 6 starts this year, 3 wins, 1 third, 2 off-the-board finishes. He had some valid excuses in those. In the first race, his first race of the year, where he was 10th in an allowance at Oaklawn, he didn't get to the lead, which if you look at him, you know that he's a horse that wants to get to the lead. And in the second start, he did get to the lead, just went a little too fast early. But since then has recovered to run. He won an allowance at Oaklawn on the 10th, ran 3rd in another allowance at Churchill, came back 1 on June 25th, and most recently was the winner of the Good Lord Stakes at Ellis. And I will mention the one loss that he did have was at Churchill Downs, where he lost to Lexitonian, who has had some really good runs in his career, most notably a second in the Bing Crosby behind Collusion Illusion, and Haw Creek Hustle, who on his best days can run some super races in Grade 1s, was a winner of the Woody Stevens, and was second in the Allen Jerkins, both of those coming in 2019. But as I mentioned, he's a speed horse. There's a lot of speed signed on here. Can't really go with him. I see him as a pace casualty. And moving on to number 3, the 7-year-old Whitmore, the veteran, back for another try in the Phoenix Stakes. He's already won this race back in 2017, and his last 2 efforts have both been second in this race. He also gets back to 6 furlongs, which is an angle that we've touched on the show most recently when we talked about him in the Vanderbilt with Acacia Courtney. Both of us kind of agreed that we both think that Whitmore tends to run better at 6 furlongs as opposed to some of his other races. The majority of his off-the-board finishes, if you go back and you look at all of them, have come in races that were longer than 6 furlongs. So definitely like Whitmore getting back to 6 furlongs. It is worth mentioning he is coming out of a 7th place finish in the Forego, but that was a bit of a weird race. It rained, and not that Whitmore is a horse that has never run on slop before. He has won over a sloppy racetrack, but looking at some of the other horses, specifically Firenze Fire, who finished poorly in that race, did come back to win a stake. So I think that Whitmore getting back to a track he's run really well at in a situation where he's going to most likely get a very strong setup. It is also worth mentioning in that Vanderbilt, the 1-2 horses really kind of stayed there throughout the race. And even though Win did come from nowhere to win, Complexity and True Timber, who were near the lead throughout, kind of stayed there for the most part. It didn't really work out for some of the other closers like Lexitonian, Everfast, and Whitmore. That's a race, like I mentioned, I'm willing to not draw a line through, but I'm willing to be able to look past it and see that Whitmore has the good body of work over 6 furlongs, like we've talked about that already. Does have the success at Keeneland with the win in the 2 seconds in the Phoenix Stakes. So I really do think that Whitmore is a strong candidate for this race. The number 4 horse is Diamond Oops, who's been bouncing around between dirt and turf throughout his career. He's got some really good runs in him, though, and if you look at the past performances, even some of the races that don't look as good in terms of finish-wise, Diamond Oops, you got to dig a little bit deeper and find some really good form in a lot of the races that he's been running in. And to start digging into some of those races now, Diamond Oops has been very good this year. He's got a win most recently in the Twin Spires Turf Sprint and a second in a handicap down at Gulfstream. That was going a mile on the dirt there. And the horse that beat him, Eye of the Jedi, came back and won the Sea of Tranquility and has been a multiple good runs in stakes races for Eye of the Jedi. So got some good form from there. He was also 4th in the Pegasus World Cup. Going back even further to last year, he beat Imperial Hint and XY Jet in the Mr. Prospector. Also ran a really good second behind Imperial Hint the day he freaked in the Alfred Vanderbilt. Also in that race, he did beat Matoli, as well as having a couple of good runs before that in the Smile, and a better than advertised 5th place finish in the Jaipur, in which the horses who beat him were either multiple time stakes winners in the form of Disco Partner or horses who turn in great performances on Breeders' Cup Day, World of Trouble, Ulm with multiple second place finishes, and the Breeders' Cup Turf winner, Belvoir Bay. So really strong form in the races that he's run recently. Diamond Oops also is really good at 6 furlongs. And kind of the same point with Whitmore. He is going to get a very good setup with some of the speed in this race, so that makes him especially dangerous. And moving on to the number 5 horse, another signed-on speed presence. This is No Parole. We know him very well from his win in the Woody Stevens earlier this year. Prior to his most recent start in the Allen Jerkins, he was undefeated, sprinting his only loss, coming when he tried 2 turns against Nadal in the Rebel in a race where all the other speed horses, including No Parole, backed up there. But he is coming out of that 9th place finish in the Allen Jerkins. He's a horse that needs the lead no matter what. And that is ultimately what cost him in there. They went a little bit too fast for him to be able to hold on to. And that's a reason why I don't like him in here. There's as we talked about, there's already signed on speed. So we know that No Parole is not going to get an easy trip. If for some reason none of the speed shows up and he gets an uncontested lead, then he's an easy play. But you can't count on that. So for me, I'm going to look against No Parole just because I don't think the speed's going to hold up this weekend. Just outside of No Parole is another 3-year-old who I've really liked this year, and this is Echo Town. Echo Town, most recently this year, was 5th in the Pat Day Mile at Churchill, but before that won the Allen Jerkins and was 2nd in that Woody Stevens behind No Parole. Also, in another stake start this year, the Bachelor at Oaklawn was 2nd behind Long Weekend, who was very highly touted at one point earlier this year. Kind of fallen off a little bit, but it was still a really good run for Echo Town in his first start in a stake race. Last start definitely wasn't the greatest effort for him, a 5th place finish in the Pat Day Mile, but that was his first time stretching out, going longer than a sprint distance. Didn't necessarily love him going the mile there, that's why I went against him. I really like him getting back to 6 furlongs. He's got 3 wins at the distance and the good second Long Weekend in the Bachelor. It is weird to say, though, that his stake win did come at 7 furlongs, but still, I do think that he does his best running at 6 furlongs. He's also going to sit, I think, a very beneficial trip because he doesn't need the lead, but he's not going to be super far back like some of the others in terms of Whitmore and Diamond Oops. Less of the case with Whitmore, but definitely if you don't love using a closer at Keeneland, this would be a horse that I would point you to because he doesn't need the lead, but he also won't be out of touch with the field. So I think Echo Town is a really, really live horse here and a really strong consider to play. The next horse is another 3-year-old, Empire of Gold, the longest shot on the morning line right now at the moment, 50-1. He's coming out of an allowance win at Remington, but he doesn't have a start in a graded stake, and his only prior stake start was in the Grand Prairie Derby at Lone Star, and you can kind of see why he's 50-1. He may be pretty close to, if not a factor, in the speed, so that's another reason to look against him. But I really, aside from looking at him in terms of speed and how the race setup, he's also just doesn't have the class of the other horses, so for that reason, he's a look against. The number 8 horse in here is Coppertown. A very interesting, very intriguing look at in here. 3 starts this year, one of those an off-the-board finish and allowance at Churchill, but it is worth mentioning he was coming off of more than a year-long layoff, 16 months to be exact, and first start for a new trainer, Wesley Ward, and he's followed that up with a really good second behind CZ Rocket, who's come back to win 2 graded stakes out in California, the Pat O'Brien, and this weekend the Santa Anita Sprint Championship over Grade 1 winner, Collusion Illusion, and then he followed that up with a win at Belterra in an allowance race. So he's obviously got some nice form coming out of that allowance at Keeneland. Really good effort for him. We know that he can run over the surface, and I think he's an intriguing horse in here, but I'm not really sure how he stacks up against the rest of the horses in here. But if you really like CZ Rocket and you think that, CZ Rocket's the real deal, then this horse ran a pretty good second behind him, beaten only 3/4 of a length. So that's definitely an angle where you can come at with this horse. And moving on to number 9, Lexitonian, a horse that I've always been really interested in, and I've used him underneath in several different angles. He comes in here out of a 5th place finish in the Forego, but like I talked about that already, that race didn't really benefit outside of win-win-win. A lot of the other closers didn't really have too much of a benefit from that race. Prior to that, a really good second behind Collusion Illusion in the Bing Crosby, a win in an allowance at Churchill, which we also mentioned earlier when we talked about Absolutely Aiden. The Count Fleet, I kind of not necessarily a line through, but I don't really put too much stock into that race. A good third in this race last year in the Phoenix. And then, his other off-the-board finish on the dirt, I'm drawing a line completely through his 7th place finish in the stake at Kentucky Downs, just because that was on the grass. His other race, the Woody Stevens, which was off the board, that's another line through race. So with Lexitonian, I think that he's definitely a horse you can use underneath. He has shown that he does have a really strong ability to close, and he did run a good race in the Phoenix last year, or last fall at Keeneland. So I really think that he's a horse that you can use in an underneath angle. I wouldn't be as ambitious to put him on top as I was last time, though. The next horse in here, number 10, is Edgemont Road, another one of the potential speed horses. He's coming out of 3 really good efforts in his last three efforts. If you look at some of his races from earlier in his career, they don't look the greatest. It took him forever to break his maiden. Finally broke it in April of this year. 2 more off-the-board finishes, but he's coming into this race off of a really, really nice win and an allowance at Ellis, and a good win also over the track this year at Keeneland, albeit that was in the claiming company. That 8-length win at Ellis, in which he won by 108.61 over the same 6 furlong distance, does look really good, but again, he is a speed horse, so he's another one that you might have to look against. But he may look like a horse that hasn't run well in maiden company in the past and hasn't ever started in a stake race, but he is one that's interesting. But him potentially and very likely being very near the lead in what's probably going to be a very fast pace kind of negates that. Moving on to number 11, Mo Don't Know. Kind of a bit of a same case as Empire of Gold was to me. I think he's just a little bit unproven. He's run in various stakes races across the Midwest. He was in the Mine Shaft last year at the Fairgrounds, 10th in that, 8th in the Fred Hooper. Also those 2 races coming in 2019. He was 6th earlier this year in the Charlestown Classic. I just don't like some of his races. I think he's a little bit too under-tested for me. And the final horse in this race is Midnight Sands, who just recently on Kentucky Derby Day had his first start in the United States. He'd been running overseas at Maydon and a couple of runs in England at Doncaster and in the Coventry Stakes at Ascot. For me, the 3rd place finish for him in that race was not bad. He was coming off a bit of a layoff, first start in the United States, and he was beaten by a couple of horses who, we've talked about Hog Creek Hustle a lot. Bourbon Resolution is another horse that's a bit underrated. He's not a world beater, but he is a past stakes winner. He won the Ben Ali at Keeneland last year. And I think, Midnight Sands is a really interesting horse in here. He could probably be a very good price. This is his first start in the United States, a bit unproven, so people may not be super willing to put something down on him. And I think he's definitely an interesting angle in here. I wouldn't put him on top, but I do think he does have a fair shot to run a good enough race. So that gets into what my picks are going to be for this race. I already did do some picks on Racing Rundown over on the podcast side, but any of those picks were just kind of in the moment, just trying to get something out there. I've now had an opportunity to look really deeply into this race and kind of make actually handicap picks. So I'm going to go on top with Echo Town. I like right now that he's 8-1 on the morning line. I don't think he's going to stay that high, but if he does stay that high, definitely include him. That 5th place finish I think was not the worst thing for him. Going to come back, and I think he will run a very, very credible race in here. I'm also going to stick with a couple of closers in here. Whitmore, I'm going to put him in for second. You've got to include Whitmore in here. He always runs well at Keeneland. I think it would be very disadvantageous to not include him. And I will throw in Diamond Oops for third, just because I do think that Diamond Oops is going to run a really nice race. We've seen him run well all over the place. It doesn't matter what the surface is with Diamond Oops. He always turns in a big effort. And for fourth, I will spice it up a little bit with Sha Sha Shake Me Up, just because I did say he should be a horse that you include underneath. But I can't put him any better than fourth. And with that, that's it for this preview. We will see you for more previews for all the Breeders' Cup races this weekend at Keeneland and Belmont. And if you do decide to play any of these races, good luck. Have a good week, and we will see you next time.
In front, but Whitmore looms large in the center of the racetrack. Here comes Whitmore outside of Hidden Scroll. Share the Upside, still very much part of this battle, and Whitmore has put his head in front. It is Whitmore now a length and a half in front of Share the Upside. Then to the inside, and Manny Waugh, he's gonna do it again. Look at this race horse. Flagstaff just ran into second. It is Whitmore. Holy mackerel, what a horse.